Hi, I'm Chuck Woodruska, and this is my main course on building an automated web app scanner. Um, some of my work is done with Dr. Zhu, so I include him as well. Here's just kind of an agenda for the rest of the video. I'm going to talk about why I got involved in this project to build a new web app scanner than what's already out there. And from there, what I used to make it. I use a framework called Selenium, but we'll get to that. What kind of progress I've made on the project so far. A demo of what I have so far with the web app scanner to show you what it can do. And then some talk about the work I still need to do and what I have planned for it. And then just to really relate it to what we're doing, why building a web security tool is so hard. I know we talk a lot about browsers and how to protect yourself, and I just wanted to mention the things that I've run into that I feel are important to tell people about when they try to build their own web security tools, so they don't run into either the stuff I have or that they're aware of the problems that come with building web tools. So first, the need for a better web app scanner. Like I mentioned, I'm working with a professor named Dr. Zhu, and he didn't know if the web app scanners were worth the cost for commercial licensed ones, where they do catch a lot of vulnerabilities, but they tend to catch a lot of false positives as well. The simplicity, he also didn't think that they were simple to use, and just being able to automate this process. I know using burp is one of the things we mention a lot when I discuss it with them, is a lot of manual work. It does have some automated things with it, but so these were kind of our three goals. As you can see, they're listed. And you can see we named them as automation, simplicity, and proper security testing. And what I mean by proper security testing is finding only real vulnerabilities and not just false positives. So for the automation part, we want to be able to give you three options as far as what you can do. One is to start from the main page of the website and just be able to test the whole site. Just let the web app scanner go do its work. Maybe you only want to test part of the website, so you just pick a node or the link that you're after, and you test that path. It's called testing the tree path. So you get a big section of the website, but not all of it. Or to be able to test just a single page, just run through one page and test the forms on it and things like that. Simplicity. So on this idea, definitely if you're in this class, you realize by now that not everybody in the world is a security expert, and that's pretty detrimental to everybody. So we try to make it simple so that you don't have to be a security expert, but it would still be able to help you. Also, if developers want to use it, realize they're not always the most security aware. Like they call it, it's not a bug, it's a feature when you develop something that wasn't meant to be in your program. And also, we want to be still useful security experts, even though it's simple to use. It's not just for people who know nothing about security. It should also be for people who do this on a daily basis, that run into web apps and are trying to test them for things. So that's simplicity. And then proper security testing. This is where the project really came into focus for us. Is trying to create something that will show up less false positives, especially on things like cross-site scripting. To do this, we're throwing around the idea of using a knowledge base, which is kind of like a big database, but it'll infer using previous knowledge, whether that's an actual security vulnerability or not. And then also allow additions to the knowledge base from the user. So it'd be like Metasploit, where people are allowed to add their own extensions to it, and just make it more useful for them. So on to the next thing, which is why reinvent the wheel. So when I first started doing this project, I needed to find some way to parse through HTML because I didn't really want to build anything to do that myself, and I knew there was lots of things out there that do a better job than I would. Like I said, HTML parsers. There's also already web app testing frameworks out there. Things like, if you may have heard of them, like Windmill or Selenium. Also looked at open source browsers. There's one called Lobo. And I was just looking at taking the parser from that and using it for myself. But I needed some way to be able to look through the HTML to gather the information I needed to be able to test the website. And what I landed upon after trying out quite a few different things was Selenium. I've actually used the Selenium IDE before, but we're using the Selenium WebDriver, which is quite a bit different. And what Selenium allows you to do, as you can see, is Selenium automates browsers. You go to their website, that's the first thing it says on their thing about what it is. Kind of made me laugh. Directly from what Selenium WebDriver is allows tester to develop tests using the WebDriver API to drive a browser as a user would. And so what actually happens when you use this WebDriver, and you'll see it in a demo, is I use the Firefox driver, so as long as you have that Firefox installed on your computer, it'll pop up an instance of the Firefox browser, open up whatever website you tell it to open up, and then you can do different things with this. Like I grab all the links for that domain and all the forms within the page. So Selenium WebDriver is just the easiest way I could find to do this. It's probably one of the first 100 users, I would say. I was in with the beta, so pretty cool to see how far it's come. It's up to, I think, version 19. Might even be more than that, but you can go look at it if you want on their website. So after finding that framework, I was actually able to make quite a bit of progress. So things that are done so far, I'm able to handle all form inputs, which are just things like text boxes, radio buttons, drop down lists, things like that. All of those except for upload inputs. Upload inputs are being able to upload files to the web app, and it's just I haven't been able to, because of extra dialog boxes. They're kind of tricky to work with, and I haven't found a way to really make those work yet. Static pages seem to run really well as far as the things I've tested. Really haven't tested too many dynamic web pages that use a lot of Ajax and things like that, but the few that I've tried some simple things with seem to have some trouble, cause my scanner some trouble, so I need to work on that some more. It's been integrated with a user interface so that it's easier for people to use. You'll see that in demo. It has an input editor for the user to input data. It's able to replay tests that you have, and it's able to take separate out your valid and invalid tests. If you do a lot of testing, you know that's important. And then a test oracle so that you have a way to get the expected value and compare it so that you know whether your tests passed or failed. How it works, there's this kind of a high level diagram of what's going on. is you have your attack knowledge base. So this is, like I mentioned, we're going to try to do some kind of knowledge base that will have like cross-site scripting attacks and SQL injections for users to use without them having to know about them, so we can run them against their website and just their own user input. Maybe there's other special things or just some valid cases they need to test that they can use. This goes into a module that just reads in that data. The web app scanner will take a URL given by the user and scan that web page, bring forth all the links from that page that belong to that domain, as well as any forms on that page. So using that in the user input data, we can test that web app, and it uses something called pairwise testing so that it gets a good amount of tests within that. Then records those inputs so that you can replay them later, and then just does that for the different pages. So that's pretty much just the high level of it. So I mentioned pairwise testing, and here's the really technical definition of it. But really, if you did something like all the combinations of possible tests, it would generate quite a few tests, and there have been many studies done on pairwise testing over combination testing, just so that you can limit your tests into a much smaller amount, which creates a faster test base. You don't have to go through every test when this is going to be just almost as effective, not just as effective. And so if you read that, I'm not going to read it to you, but we'll go to a much kinder example. So you can see on our left here, this is all combinations for 3 variables, and all we're doing is doing the colors red, green, and blue, and it does all combinations of those for 3 different variables. You can see 3 different variables doing all combinations, there are 27 different possibilities. But in reality, we could limit that down to 9 by doing something like making sure that we pair them up. So we want A and B to be read at one point in time, and B and C to be read at one point in time, where they have multiple cases of that over here in the all combinations. So here's one case where A and B are both read. Here's another case where both A and B are both read. Here's another case where both A, B, and read. And the same thing happens with B and C both being read. And also we got B and C, one B being red and C being green, where that happens 3 times over here. So we don't need to do an exhaustive execution of tests like that when this is going to be as effective with a third of the space being taken up. Hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what pairwise testing is. So here I'm just going to demo some of my web app scanner. First I'm just going to open up Google because that's what I used to do a lot of testing on, so pretty familiar with that one. And you can see it just gathered all the links from the main Google page and the search form. So if we navigate one of those nodes, it'll actually go to that page and navigate it for us. You can see over here, I went to that page. You can do things like edit the table data, and it'll actually go in and scan the page to find all the inputs. That's what it's doing right now. And you can see it found an email and password field that were fields that the user can change. Also on that page, there was this checkbox, but it doesn't show you that on the edit table data because you can't change that anyway. And it'll actually do pairwise testing of anything you put in these. Here we're going to go into just a little web app I made just to test on. We'll go into this logon, navigate that, get the table data. And you can see here too, it went to the page and everything, and it's scanning it for the inputs. When it finds them, I'll bring up a table for us so that we can edit the table data. So on here, I'll just show you how that combination and versus a single input would look. So we get something like this. We'll do it as a combination this first time. And when we navigate, it'll actually open up two browsers. The first one is to go out and find the input fields, and the other ones they actually execute our tests. Put them side by side here just so you can see a little bit better. So you can see what it tried here. This is just a record of what it tried. It's on form 1. It's tried the username Dave, password A, and then this on right here is just the name of the checkbox variable or checkbox input. And this is the pairwise testing combination. So you can see it's all ones right there. Here is another one, same thing. So you can see there's 4 there. Now if we went back, so if we went back and looked at the table data again, change this not to be combinations, and we navigated it. Going to do the same thing again, open up a browser to read the inputs and use another one to execute them. And why that's going, since you've already seen some of that. In my console view, of Eclipse, I actually have it printing out a bunch of stuff, like the input name, how many choices there are for that. So because we put this one, you can see in the combination we only had 2. I combined both username and password. Here you can see it actually separated those out. Classic D2L. So now when we look at this, you can see it tried Dave in A and C Wadraska in A, and Dave and C Wadraska 1 exclamation point, and C Wadraska 1 exclamation point. So you can see it separated out the username and password and tried different. They still only use 4. This again, pairwise testing makes it so that it only has to have a pair at least once. If we want to replay this, we can just go play diff first. I'll actually just do what we just did from the recorded inputs. And you can see yet again in my console view, it'll show that it started the recorded inputs and it's redoing those. If you see these match up with what we just ran, so as soon as that's done replaying, we'll look at some other stuff. So that was just showing you some things like putting data in a table, running combinations versus single inputs. There's nothing too different about running from valid or invalid. So now I'm just going to show you the test oracle. This is so you can check your tests. It'll tell you, in this case, there's a bunch of different commands. I'm using isTextPresent to check if the screen, anywhere in the screen it ever says not successful, which it does when it has an invalid username, password. And you can see there's a bunch of other ones. Is checked, is it is visible. Cool thing about this is that you can add any of your own commands as well to the Selenium source. And so if you need something different than that's there, you can just add it and my web app scanner should still be able to handle it. So doing this one, we'll run it and I'll show you what it prints out. It's just simply a true or false, whether this is true. So go run that. So here it's going. And we can match these up to um, our recorded data. You can see the first three were true, the last one was false. Go back over here. You can see Dave and A was not a valid one, so it showed up had not successful, as was 2 and 3, but this fourth one right here was actually a valid username password combo, and so that returned false over here because not successful is not seen on the screen. And you can just do a bunch of different stuff to help you know on that. The last thing I'm going to show you on this, just as the demo, is why our choice for pairwise testing is important. So you see this page and it has all these different checkboxes. Obviously it's not going to return us with anything to type in for user input because there's no text field or password field there. So we can't do a combination there. We could still do a test oracle though if we want to check if something's checked at the end of the test and things like that. So let's get rid of that for right now. We'll go back to this, just look at the page, and you can see there's just a ton of checkboxes. And if you're going to do all combinations of this, it would be 2 to the 17th, I believe, because there's 2 options for 17 different items. So that would be quite a bit. So if we went over here though and just ran this, it should have significantly fewer tests because we're just pairing them up. And you see it's checking these boxes, and then clicking to submit. It keeps doing that. If we go over here to the console just to look at that, you can see the form and all the inputs it's looking at. And actually when you hit submit, it's going to a different page called the cart because you're saving your items to a cart. So we can keep watching that. So you can see it ran 10 tests. If we go over here, we can look at those 10 tests, what they were. You'll see a lot of space here because they're saved to a database, and that database, each entry is just a string of 50 characters, so it includes that white space. Going down to the end here, we can see the different combinations we had here. And it actually does do correct pairwise testing, and that every one of these is paired up with the other one at least once. So like I said, that's the good reason to use pairwise testing. It's just when you have lots and lots of possible inputs and you don't want a very large space, sample space, you can use it to get it down to very few. That's pretty much all I have to show you on the demo. Yes, I can't really think of anything else besides those things. As I mentioned, just being able to do user input, handling all sorts of inputs with the pairwise testing. I didn't really show you invalid because of it does the same thing as valid. It's just going to run whatever strings are there. For that test oracle, we're working on breaking that down into valid and invalid so that you can test your valid test different from your invalid tests, which I think makes sense. That's just not there yet, so there's that. I showed you a test oracle and a command, how that works. That is kind of it, I guess. Also, I guess if you can navigate farther from these, but it's really not going to do much right now. So that is pretty much it for the demo. So that's my demo. As I've been mentioning throughout the video, there's still quite a bit of work still needed. If you're at the fall symposium, I also gave a presentation on this. Since then, some of the bigger things that I've gotten taken off my list are invalid and valid testing, test oracle, and being able to replay. Still having some trouble with saving the scan and tests. The tree structure I use is a pretty complex data structure and just makes it pretty difficult to save. Working on that right now, actually. Should be done with that in a couple of weeks. Another big thing is that knowledge base that has an inference engine to be able to actually tell you that your site's vulnerable with a very good degree of accuracy. And then handling dynamic websites is another big issue. And then, of course, whenever you program anything and you add new things, lots of bugs and problems happen. So it's always a problem for me, I guess. Whenever I change things arise. Happens to all good programmers, I guess. So that's kind of the work still needed. And then just want to talk about some of the problems I've had, why I think it's so hard to actually build a good general web security tool. So I guess first off, one of the big things for me was browsers. I guess beginning this project, I didn't know how big a deal choosing which browser to use. I thought I was just going to be able to make a web scanner that could use all of them interchangeably. Selenium actually has web drivers for all the major browsers, so you can automate Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Opera, all those good ones. But to be able to do that, I would have had to make a bunch of different case statements and have all kinds of exceptions. So once I figured that out, that these browsers do differentiate so much, I just chose Firefox. It was the most developed at the time by Selenium, so that was kind of how I chose it. Browsers also help developers make bad code. I can show you, I'll show you a really good example right here. So being the big NBA fan that I am, when I went to choose test sites, this is one of the test sites I chose. which was good and bad. It was good because I figured out right away that not every site um, properly writes their HTML. One way to check that, and my web app scanner is having problems finding the search bar up here. So one way to just be able to tell that is you can check, and it'll tell you if there's errors within the HTML, whether it's actually valid HTML or not. But the reason it still renders and it'll even work is because of the browser. So the browser's just a little too nice and allows stuff like that to happen. Of course, if you've taken previous web app hacking classes, you know that the browser doing that's bad too, because it'll complete the angle brackets for things that maybe as a developer you didn't want it to do, and it opens you up for vulnerabilities. So that is just my example of why browsers are sometimes troublesome by trying to help too much. So you can see, like I said, browsers help developers make this code that shouldn't actually be able to render, but it does just because browsers are so helpful at making it work. And then of course there's standards, which are always fun. As you can see, that little webcomic. Um, that was a big deal too. So when trying to develop this, I try to stick as close to standards as possible. And kind of one of my rules is when making this, when in doubt, just go by W3C and what they say. Because if you're going to make exceptions out from the standards, then what do you allow and what don't you allow in your tool? And it's really hard to say. Really frustrating at times when they don't stick to the standards. For instance, a really good one for me was lots of inputs for forms are supposed to have designated names, name attribute. But at some point in time, it got changed to ID. And so some things have a name, some things have an ID, some things have a name and an ID. And when doing this, starting this project out, I went with name because lots of things required a name attribute, or so they say, but obviously you don't have to use the standards if you don't want to, and people don't. So I have to go through and write a bunch of if statements saying if you can't find a name, we'll look for an ID. If you can't find either, then I have to throw an exception. And it's just kind of a pain. Haven't even got all that buggy stuff out of the way yet. Just being able to do that type of thing. And then of course the last thing is just the speed of changes. The web is a very fast development area. You can make one change and upload it to, or change your website pretty much instantly. I used to do a lot of testing on Google's site because I figured they wouldn't care how much traffic I put through their site. Lots of people use it for lots of things, so I was pretty sure they could handle anything I threw at it. But they changed their site pretty much like once a week, it looked like. And I used to do stuff on YouTube, and they consolidated that with their login. I saw just a bunch of different stuff they've been changing all the time. You'd be surprised if you look at it as detailed in a detailed view that how much it changes. It looks pretty similar every time you look at the page, but underneath it, they're doing a lot of different stuff. So that's just another problem, is that with desktop software, you have to send out a patch to the person, you have to have that person install that software, everything like that. With a web page, you're requesting that page, and whenever they make changes to that, unless you have it cached or something, and they don't need you to refresh it so that it's not cached anymore, they don't require you to get a new page every time. But then you're fine. But it surprised me how much it changes, I guess, and just how often sites were willing to update their stuff. Something to be aware of when building a web security tool. And I guess those are just three big things that hit me, um, caused lots of frustration and uh, just something different that when you're doing a web security tool versus maybe a desktop security tool, something to look out for. I guess if you have questions, if you just want to drop those to me on the discussion board, I'll try my best to answer any of them I can. Here's a bunch of my sources. And the bottom one, if you see that, I actually host my code up on Google Code. If you want to look at it, it's there. You can download the source. You'll actually have to get the Selenium library from that top link, which is Selenium's homepage, so that you can run it though, because it uses a lot of their libraries that I don't just include in the source. If you want to set it up and you need help setting it up, I can try to help you as well. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening to my talk, and hope you enjoyed.